Boom, here we are. Welcome back. It's Saturday morning, everybody. It's Saturday morning. It's time for our trip through the audio jungle. It's going to be a good time, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Za and all them and everybody else. Let's talk about audio cables, interfaces, and I/O routing today. Give me 1 second here. Let me just share this post out to the other pages so people can follow along. And it's going to be super groovy. So let's share this to everyone. Cool. All right, so last week we talked about the, we almost forgot. Smoke them if you got them. So last week we talked about the physics of audio and sound waves and how they work and how they interact with your room and each other. We started there along this journey because everything else that we do for this whole workshop all the way through the end is going to depend on that information. We're going to make decisions based on those simple truths about waves. When they meet each other, they get louder. If they meet each other with reverse polarity, then they cancel each other out. So we're going to use those truths. If you didn't catch the last workshop, check out my YouTube channel. It's on there, and you'll be able to learn what we're talking about. So we're going to take it a step further today and talk about what happens after you make the sound in the room and we start to capture it, how it travels through the different types of cables and stuff, and what we do with it once we have it in its electrical form, right? Voltage. So let's take a look at our friend, the old SM58. Let me go grab one. This is the mic that you're going to see most commonly throughout the world. You're going to see it on stages and podiums and everywhere, right? This is a workhorse mic. It's inexpensive. It never dies. People buy them early and keep them for their whole lives. So this is a pretty good representation of what you might see in the real world. We speak into this mic, and it has what's called a transducer inside it. Like, there's different types of mics with different types of transducers, and this one in particular is a dynamic mic. So the way that this mic works is we make sound waves, and they move the molecules in the air. They bump into each other and make these physical waves that we can't see, but they are there, and they hit a diaphragm in this thing, which is like, it's a diaphragm, a little thin piece of something. I don't know what it's made of, dielectric or whatever, some kind of fancy term. And that pulses when it gets hit by the air. So with each of those pulses, the microphone, the transducer, converts that energy into electrical pulses, voltage. So the wave is now being represented after it leaves this microphone as voltage, which is just electricity going down a wire. And we have a bunch of different types of cables that all these can go through, and let's start going over some of that stuff. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about how cables work, how the wave travels through the wire. Then we're going to jump over to the field trip table over here, and we're going to make a microphone cable from scratch. So you'll see how to make a cable, and that's going to be super handy because you don't necessarily have to make all your own cables. I make all my own cables because I'm a psycho, and I don't trust store-bought cables. But being able to make a cable means you can also fix cables, and cables break all the time. So being able to fix them is going to be a really handy skill, and it's not that hard to do. So we're going to go over that. Then we're going to jump back over to the computer, and I'm going to show you all the gear that I have set up here, all the audio gear, and how the signal travels through each of the pieces to get into the computer. And if we have time afterwards, I'm going to go over taking the audio from the computer that we've recorded into the computer, and then we're going to send it back out of the computer through something like a guitar effects processor or just something to mangle the sound a little bit, and then back into the computer. So we're going to learn all about cables and audio interfaces, and then audio I/O routing. So what do I buy, where do I plug it in, that kind of stuff. Let's jump over to my desktop, shall we? Jump into my desktop, here we go, it's 1, 2, 3 time. All right, here we are on my desktop, cool. So let's bust open some of these drawing apps here that I got so we can do some drawing. I'll use Affinity Designer because I already prepped it all. I'm just that kind of guy, I guess. Let's see. This isn't the one I'm looking for. Let's take a look at some of these slides. All right, here we go. Like a professional. Cables, audio interfaces, and I/O routing. Here's some of the types of cables that you might see that relate to audio. They're all over the place. So you're probably familiar with them. You might not know what they're called. This is an XLR cable. It's what's called a balanced cable, and we'll get into that. It has 3 pins. This is what you use for a microphone, so you probably see these all the time. This is a TS cable. It's a 1/4 inch, and this is what you use to plug in a guitar. So you see these all the time too. This one here is called TRS, and the scale looks like it's an 1/8 inch, but it's really a 1/4 inch plug here. It looks like a guitar cable, but it's not a guitar cable. And the primary difference here is check it out. If you look closely at this cable, you can see there's one little sleeve here, one little ring, and if you look over at this one, there's 2. So here we have basically 2 wires. There's a wire for the tip, and there's a wire for the sleeve. And here we have 3 wires. There's a wire for the tip, and there's a wire for the ring, and there's a wire for the sleeve. So that's why you have TS and TRs. Tip, ring, sleeve, tip, sleeve. Right? So you don't necessarily have to know that, but that's the difference. And it's important because if you pick up one of these cables and try to plug your guitar into something with it, it might not work because some gear doesn't work with this kind of cable, right? So take a look at it and make sure that you're matching the cable that you're using to the signal that it's on. And don't worry, this is just a quick overview. We're going to get way more deep into how the cables work. This is an 1/8 inch to a 1/4 inch cable. So this is to like plug into your CD player or your iPhone or something like that, and then you could take the other end and plug it into like a mixer, and you can play music at your event or a party or whatever. There's a lot of reasons you might use one of these, and you probably want to have them around. This one's a little stranger, but you still might see it around quite a bit. It's an optical cable. It's called Toslink. These connectors, they call it Toslink. And this is a fiber optic cable. So there's no wire in this at all. It's just like a little tube, and it shoots, or you know those things that you see at like 4th of July and people wave them and it's got the lights in them? I'm pretty sure it works like that. It shoots a red light through this cable, and you can see it come out the other end. It's pretty neat. So you use these optical cables to connect audio equipment at kind of the prosumer level and up, and that provides some benefits in speed and noise and stuff like that. Then we get into our more computery types of cables, and those are also important in audio because a lot of the times we're working with computers. So we have our USB-A to USB-B cable. That's one here. Let's get your normal USB plug on one end, and the other end is like, you see this go into printers and scanners a lot, older ones, USB 2 ones. So these you can find around. You probably have you got one in a drawer somewhere, I'm sure of it. Then we have Thunderbolt. These were used more on Macs for audio equipment. It was like the precursor kind of to USB-C, which is what people use now. We have MIDI here. You can see there's like 7. I think it's 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 pins, I guess, in a MIDI cable. And MIDI cables don't actually transmit audio at all. What MIDI cables do is they transmit data about audio, like what the volume of the note was, what the note was, how long the note was held down. And then the computer or whatever on the other end of the MIDI cable can take all that, kind of is like metadata in a photo. It can take all that information and then feed it to a virtual instrument that'll play it back like a real instrument. It's pretty dope. And then we have, this is what you see more today and going forward probably, is just this single USB-C cable, because this is a very fast throughput cable and it's cross-platform. And the best thing about this cable is that you can insert it into the jack either way. There's no upside down. So that's pretty cool. They finally fixed that problem. This is the landscape really of the audio cables you're probably going to come across. There are tons more. There's a million types of cables, but these are the primary cables that you're going to see. And let's take a look at sort of the inside of a mic cable real quick. I'm going to skip around in my slides here just to demonstrate it better. So this is what the cable actually looks like for a microphone. We're going to jump over there and look at it and see what if it really matches up. So we have our rubber, rubber coating, and then there's a braid here. This is a metal braid. It's all woven together, and this braid acts as a shield for the wires inside it. And then we have 2 wires inside, protected by this bit of yarn or paper or whatever they use to separate these wires from this shield. Then we have this little tippy thing. This is where all the pins connect. The wires all get connected here. This looks like somebody, I just found this image on Google, and you can see there's some solder in there already. So this is a piece that somebody salvaged from an old mic cable, or maybe was fixing. Here's just the mic cable connector. If you were to take one apart, these are all the little pieces that go inside it. And this is how it all fits together to make this, right? And then here's just the wiring diagram, so you can see where all the pins go for these cables. And that's what a cable looks like. So let's pop over into, let's use Photoshop real quick, because I want to show you the difference between a balanced and an unbalanced cable. This is a concept that confused me for a really long time, because it was, I don't know, it's just hard for me to grasp. Now, if you have a mixer or a device where you're plugging cables into it, a computer thing or a guitar processor, sometimes it will say on the jacks whether it accepts a balanced or an unbalanced connection. And sometimes that is abbreviated to just BAL or unBAL, so you know. Now let's take a look at how the audio travels. Let me find my pen here. Let's grab a little white brush, and we'll use this brush here, make it a little bit bigger, and let's make our microphone. I swear to God this is a microphone. I swear it. All right. So here's our microphone, right? And somebody's singing into it. Here's our person. There's their nose, and here's their mouth. Hey, I'm singing a song. Happy times about Saturday morning. All right, here we have our person. I swear to God, this is a person. This person is singing, right? And the waves are coming, and they hit the diaphragm of the mic, right? The transducer then takes this physical signal and it converts it into voltage. And what comes through here, do 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 do. We're gonna come over here, and I'll just put a box here. This is our thing. It's a mixer, or it's a computer, or whatever it is it's going to. So what happens is the sound is coming out of the voice. It's moving the air molecules around. It's making these waves. They're getting hit by they are hitting the capsule, the diaphragm here, and the transducer is converting that signal into electronic pulses. And those look like this. So the wave is traveling like this down a wire until it gets to the end, right? So do. I'll just do this fast. So here's one signal traveling down one wire and getting to its destination. So usually in like a guitar chord, you have 2 wires. One of them is just the wire in the center. They call it the core. That wire carries the signal. That's this wire. And then there's also a shield, which is like a ground. So there's 2 wires in a guitar cable. We're talking about a mic cable, though, keep in mind. So this is what a guitar cable looks like. This is what an unbalanced cable would look like. There's 2 wires. Signal's traveling down one of them, and then the other one's just a common ground, right? And then in a mic cable or in a balanced cable, what they do is put another cable over here. So there's 3 cables. There's the sleeve, and then there's the positive, or the hot, sometimes it's called. And then what they do is they put an exact opposite of the wave. So if you think about last week and what we were doing and describing how the waves bounce off of the walls and interact with each other, and when they meet, they can either make themselves louder or cancel out, we're actually using this phenomena in the cable to make the cable less noisy. Because here's what happens. You've got a long piece of metal, right? Here's your guitar cable, and here's a ground. And there's a shield around it or whatever. But think about our world and how much stuff is around our world, how many magnets and how much radio signals and gigajawatts are just floating around in the air all the time. This acts as an antenna. It picks up radio waves, it picks up microwave sounds. I mean, we can't necessarily comprehend what the sound is. We just notice it as noise. So the guitar cables are generally really noisy cables because they're just one signal and they're not really shielded all that well against interference. But that's okay with electric guitars. They're supposed to be kind of noisy, right? Electric guitars are inherently noisy. So that's why guitar cables are like this. It's cheaper to make and they just don't need a copy. Here's our mic cable though. What we're doing is we're taking our signal, our hot signal, our cold signal, right? We're running them down the wire. And then at the end here, we flip the phase of one of them, right? So what's happening is we're canceling this wave. Well, we're taking a copy of this signal, and we're canceling it out, right? And then anything that gets introduced to the signal here is just noise, right? I'm not doing a very great job of explaining this here. Let's try a different way. Let me grab an eraser. Let's get rid of this. We don't need this. Let's just look at the wires. This is a little bit too much, I think, for me to explain. So let's try a different approach. We're going to have our red wire. Come on, man. Said we're going to have... Oh, I'm on the eraser still, dude. Okay, I said we're going to have a red wire. I said we're going to have a red wire. This is our hot signal. So the current is going like so. All the way down the line. And then we have a ground, which I'll just make like a silver color. And there's no signal traveling along that. We're not sending data down it. And then we have a cold, which I'll make blue. And we send... Oh, that's not blue. That's gray still. So we also send a copy of the signal down the blue wire. And this cancels out, right? So it's like there's no signal here. It's canceling out. The only signal that's getting introduced here is noise that's coming from the outside world, right? So there's noise that's getting introduced just by the physical nature of it being a cable and it being metal. It's picking up radio waves, it's picking up interference from your microwave and your dryer and all sorts of stuff. So what we do on the other end here, now these are reversed phase, so there's no sound. They're completely canceling out. What we do here at the end when we plug it in is we flip the phase, or we don't actually physically do it. Our devices do it for us. And what happens is now these match up and they're one signal, and everything that isn't this signal, all the noise that got introduced along the way here, this all cancels out and goes away. So it's like a noise reduction technique. We're using the phase here to protect our signal as it travels across the wire, and then we're exploiting it at the end and using the phase to cancel out all the noise that was introduced. So that's a balanced cable. So you see in audio, there's balanced cables because you can run a longer cable and introduce less noise into it with a balanced cable. Do you get the difference? Mic cables are balanced. They are also very low level, right? Coming off a mic, think about our SM58 here. There's no battery in this. There's no power in this at all. So this is a fairly weak electrical signal that's going through that mic cable. Whatever it is on the end of the mic where we plug it in here, whether it's our mixer or our computer or whatever, there's something in here that's boosting that signal a lot, right? That also can contribute to noise. So by doing this, we're not boosting any of this noise that got introduced. It got canceled out before that boost happens. All we get on this end is the nice, clean signal that we started with. Right, so that's balanced versus unbalanced cables. Let's pop back over here. So here's the main difference. A balanced cable has 3 wires. There's 2 copies of the same signal, and we're doing that so that we can mess with the phase relationship to get rid of some noise. An unbalanced cable has 2 wires, like a guitar cable. There's no copy of the signal. There's one, and electromagnetic interference gets introduced to it. That's part of the sound. That's part of why we like the sound of an electric guitar. These balanced cables have lower noise. A mic cable is lower noise, or a TRS cable with the tip ring sleeve. Those are lower noise than the unbalanced ones, which are higher noise. And if you think about it, a balanced cable could be stereo or mono, right? It could be, so this same cable could be mono balanced, so we're sending the same copy of the signal across both the wires, or it could be stereo. We have a right and a left side going across the 2 wires. In most instances, we're talking about a mono balanced cable, but you should know that. And a guitar cable is just one signal. It's mono, right? There's no 2 speakers involved. You might hear the sound coming out of both your speakers equally, but it's just one sound being split, right? That's different. If you were to plug in like a keyboard or an organ or something like that with a TRS, a balanced cable, that could support actually giving you a stereo sound where you're hearing different things coming out of the 2 different speakers at different places in space. So very important distinction here between balanced and unbalanced. And I think that's what I want you to know before we pop over. So let's, you guys ready for field trip time? I think it's field trip time. I think we should pop over there. Let me situate us here. I'll get rid of this right now. And let's swap over to the table. All right, here we go. We're going to the cable, gonna be cool. Bring my coffee with me. All right, I'm gonna need my ashtray too, and my lighter. Here we go. Ooh. All right. So let me just turn this thing on here. Let it heat up. I'm going to talk about some of the tools that we have here on the table. So first of all, there's obviously the soldering iron. I don't solder a lot of stuff. I went through a phase where I did electronic stuff, but when I was buying this iron, I talked to a buddy of mine who was into electronics, and he told me to just get the Weller one, which it's the more expensive. It's like a better one. You could get one from Harbor Freight for $20 or $30, but the Weller one's like $100 or something. He said if you spend the money now, you'll have it your whole life. You can replace all the parts, and you don't have to go to Harbor Freight every 6 months and get a new one. So I did that, and that's been good advice, and I've had this for 10 or 15 years now. I bought it from You Do It Electronics in Needham, which is like the only electronics store left in the state, as far as I know. Cool. So here's the iron. It has a cable that comes to a little wand, or I don't know what you call this thing, but it's got a tip on it. This is what gets hot. This is what we use to heat the work. I hear a comment over there popping up, so I'm just going to step over and make sure that everything's cool and you can hear me and everything, and then we'll get back to this. So give me a sec. Okay, cool. That's just Lisa and Laura talking, so I assume everything's groovy. I don't see 50 angry faces, which is good. Next to my soldering iron, I have, this is just a little thing to hold it so I don't burn things. It's strong and stable, and I can leave this here and not worry about it. Next to that, I have, this is just like a little artist's X-Acto knife kit, and I use this to cut the cable with some level of precision. We have a helping hands guy over here. This was a Radio Shack job. I suppose you could get it at Harbor Freight maybe, or Amazon for sure. They're inexpensive, and it's just little articulating arms in a magnifying glass. And it also has a little thing that you can stick your wand in, but this is a little less, I don't know, I don't trust it as much. It's wobbly. This is handy because I can use it to hold the wires for me. It's got 2 little roach clips on it, and you can use this to hold the wires. And also, you can use them as roach clips, so that's value. We're always looking for value. That's called helping hands, and you see them a lot in electronics. Now we have, this is just a little dish that has, this is like a Brillo pad. I think it's brass. And this is used between doing work with the soldering iron. You use this to clean off the tip, right? So it just kind of stab it in here a few times, and this cleans all the burnt like tin and all the old flux that was on here. It cleans off the tip so that the heat can transfer through it more effectively. So that's important. This guy's just a clamp that I got from Harbor Freight. This is helpful for me to hold the connectors so I don't burn myself, because if I'm sometimes the connectors themselves get really hot when you're soldering them. So this can save my hand. A couple simple tools, a wire stripper. Might not use it, but it's good to have. And I have these little snippy pliers that are helpful. Whatever, kind of little tools you have will probably come in handy. Here's just pre-made cables. This is solder. I'm using lead solder. It's old school. They do have no lead solder now, but it doesn't work very well, so I'm not a fan. I just use the regular old solder, and as far as I know, no tumors yet. Then this guy here is a cable tester. I can use this to make sure that the wiring in the cable is correct. So let's use it on a cable that's already made. I'll turn it on the cable tester, and then let's just grab this cable. Now here's just a prefab cable, and if we plug it into this device, out, in. Now you can see it's just testing the wiring of the cable, and it's showing me that pin 1 is matching pin 1, so that's good. Pin 2 is matching pin 2, and that's good. And pin 3 is matching pin 3. So there's two little matrices on here, the output and the input, and the line should be going in that direction if the cable is good. If the cable's not good, it'll show what's wrong here. It's either the wires are mixed up, or one of them's not connected anymore, or you ran over the cable too many times with your chair wheel and something got messed up. If it's not a solid connection, like sometimes a cable is iffy, there's a little set of lights here called intermittent. So if it senses those sorts of sudden disconnects or slight disconnects, or something's wrong with the cable, those intermittent buttons will light up. So this is the hallmark, I guess. This is the sign of a healthy, good cable, and we can know that, so that's good. This is good to have in your kit if you're a sound guy, if you do an open mic, if anywhere that you're working with lots of different cables, especially if you're working with cheaper cables, you should have one of these. It can save a lot of time. Next we have our cable. Now this is microphone cable. There's no connectors on it. I got this. It's Mogami. They make it in Japan. It's what they use on a lot of recording studios. People trust it. Neglex 2549 microphone cable by Mogami. So I've just had a spool of this for a while, and I've used it to make a lot of cables, and none of them have failed me. So this has been good cable. But cable ranges in quality all over the place. There's all sorts of materials they make cables with. Some of them are shielded well, some of them aren't shielded well. The connector qualities are different, so you can make your cable to your own specifications or your own OCD. Now we have the connectors. There's one for each end. There's a male connector. This is the male connector in all its pieces, right? So we'll assemble this. This is the bit that has all the pins on it that go into the jack. Then this is just the housing. It all screws into that. And this little thing is interesting. So this goes on the wire here, like so. It's tough to get it in there. And this goes inside the housing, right? And its purpose is if you trip on the cable, it will clamp down real quick and prevent you from pulling these solder joints off of the pins. So this, well, that didn't do a very good job because it's not in the housing, but it does a really good job of keeping the cable safe when you pull it in and out and stuff like that. So that's what that little plastic piece that makes the whole thing work does. Cheaper cables don't do this. And you can tell in a cheap guitar cable that doesn't have something like this because it just feels flimsy. And then there's the female version of this, which is very similar. And then I have these, and these are just end caps. So each one of these connectors comes with a black one, But you can buy separate ones like this that are different colors. So you would get 2 for every cable that you're going to make. And this way I can color code my cables. So when I'm using them at an open mic, or if I'm doing a podcast that has 5 people on it, I can just see what color it is. And then I can look at the mixer and I can be like, all right, the orange one goes there, obviously. So this is just a nice clean way to do it. That's a little bit, I don't know, I like it better than tape. These aren't expensive. These are like an extra $1 or something like that. Now, why are we making cables instead of just buying them? There's a couple reasons. One of them is just because it's cool and we want to know how to take care of ourselves, right? And making cables, fixing cables is an important part of a musician's care and feeding. Another reason is to save some money, though you don't really save that much money because this stuff isn't cheap. The cable itself is it's pretty expensive. And the connectors themselves, they're like $4 or $5 a piece. 2, 3, 4, $5. It depends on the connector and the company you get and the quality of it, but they're not cheap. And the time that it takes to put it together, if you count your time, can be immense. So you have to think about that. The reason that I make my own cables is because I want to trust them. I've bought so many prefabricated cables from Guitar Center and they just die, or I never really trust them. So now when we start to look at the routing of all my audio gear back there, there's a lot of stuff and there's a lot of cables, and I don't want to ever have to crawl back behind that desk and mess with them. So I made every single cable. We're going to go through the whole routing matrix later, but I made every single cable to the exact length that it needed to be to connect all this stuff together. I did that because I trust myself more than I trust whoever put the cable together. All right, let's get started. This thing's hot. You know what all this stuff is. So the first step is we have to decide the length of our cable. And this is a pretty long cable. Maybe I could just make it this long. It'd be nice to have a really long mic cable, I guess. I can always cut it and change it later too, so there's that. So let's just use the whole cable because I don't have a reason to cut it in half. The first thing we need to do is strip back this rubber shielding. It's not really shielding, it's just the rubber casing, I guess. So I'm going to use my X-Acto knife to do that. I'm going to take off about like thumb size piece. So I'll start cutting like right around here, and I'll be really careful. I don't want to cut that. Remember, you saw the picture. We don't want to cut that shielding that's underneath this. We just want to cut the rubber off of it. So I'm being kind of careful. I'm turning it a little. I'll just use my thumb. This is a weird blade on the Sharpie. It's not regular Sharpie size, because I don't use them enough and they get rusty. And then I go to the weirder ones in the kit. Alright, there we go. I wouldn't normally make a cable here in this room. I have a whole like separate desk for it downstairs with all my pokey tools and favorite things, you know. But this is for demonstration purposes. So here we go. We've taken off just the rubber piece of the cable, and what you can see here is the braid. Now this braid is used to help shield the wires inside from interference. It's also itself one of our cables. So we don't cut this off. We unbraid it and twist it together, and this is our ground. Right? And the ground is woven across the whole cable all the way down to try and shield it from getting, you know, your wireless mouse signal picked up or whatever. So look at what we got in here. There's a couple of little, these are plastic things. I don't really know why they're there. I think it might be just to help the cable keep its shape. So if you run over it, it's a little more tough. But I'm not sure. We just, in this type of cable, this isn't in every cable, but this particular type of Mogami cable has these little, like, plastic things. So I'm just going to snip those with this because we don't need them. Snip. Snip. Okay. So now what do we got? We've got our ground, we've got our hot signal, and we've got our reversed polarity copy of the hot signal. And now all we have to do is this part can get tricky. If you don't put all the pieces in the right order in the first part and then you solder it all together and realize that you forgot a piece, that can be super frustrating. So let's make sure that we get all the pieces on correct first. Let's kind of put it all together first before we start heating things up. So first things first, we would put one of these on. We'll make this a gray cable because I don't have a gray cable already. And you just kind of jam it up through there. It might be easier to do this part before, it might be easier to do that part before you make the cuts, but in this case, I didn't have an issue. Then you put on this little plastic thingy, the clamp guard. So this goes on. I think maybe this way. This makes more sense. Yeah, we'll do it this way. Make sure it fits that way. Does it fit that way? Nope. So it goes this way. Every connector's little plastic piece is different, so you got to figure them out. Right, and now this will fit in there. It doesn't. Oh, yeah, it does. It doesn't have the little notch, though, which is interesting. So this thing has a little notch in it because it's only supposed to go into the cable one way. I think this might be the female one. Or let's look at the thing that came with it. See how this fits. This fits much better. Should be the same size. Let's go with it. We'll see what happens. I'm going to use it. I'm going to trust it. I think I have this thing backwards. Stupid plastic thing that makes the whole thing work. What's your problem, man? This isn't gonna fit in here, is it? Nah, that clamps too much. It doesn't fit in here. Well, I've made a bunch of these cables before, I swear. It's been a while now. So let's grab the one it came with, I guess. We'll just use the one it came with. And I'll do this. Cool. And then, yeah. Slamming the cable through the thing. Doo-doo. Does it fit this way? I feel like it should, because it would clamp that way, right? Nah, it still goes the other way. It's always the little plastic piece that ruins everything. Okay. Let's hope that's right. Real quick, let's take a look. They don't really show you on this. I could look it up, but let's just go with this. This looks correct to me, so it seems to fit. All right. Now let's make sure this would fit on top of it before I solder anything. And it wouldn't. See, it's a good thing I tested. I bet this plastic piece doesn't even come with this. This probably came from something else. Or the female end. Did I reverse them? No, they're the same. Metal plug, straight cord. How does this thing fit together? Just like that. Fits fine, as long as the cable's not in it. Maybe I just need to really pinch it hard. I didn't expect the little plastic piece portion of the cable making process to take this long, but whatever. It takes as long as it takes, I guess. See, now I forgot to put this thing on first. Haven't even started soldering yet. And this is why making your own cables maybe doesn't save you money. Because it takes a long time. But after you've made a couple in a row, you would notice that. This seems right. It seemed right last time too, and it didn't fit. And it still doesn't. I don't know, man. I don't know. What's your problem? It doesn't fit either way. Can this fit? Alright. Is that gonna work? Yeah. Can this fit in there now still? Oh, there's my little notch. So this looks correct. So now I line up the little notch. Phew! All right, so that's how it goes. I'm glad we got that sorted. Now, it goes with the clampy ends down, and it really does just, it digs in. You got to push this in really hard, and it clamps them hard. So, cool. Now we've got our cable staged. We got the back thing. Make sure you get the back thing on first, because it sucks to solder it and then not have the back thing. And now we need to strip a little bit off of these two, the hot and the cold wire. So I'm going to use this little set of pliers to do that. You could use the knife or a Leatherman or your teeth. I use my teeth a lot, but I'm getting older and that seems dumb. I don't want to wreck my teeth over a wire. But I used to do that a lot as a kid. I'd just bite it, and that was fine. Never really hurt myself doing it. I could also use this purpose-built tool, the wire stripper. That could be fun. Woo. Yeah, the wire stripper doesn't work that well. So, back to this. I've also, in a pinch, when I was really struggling getting wire things off, I've just melted the casing around them too. It's probably not advisable, but I've done it. All right. So here's what we got. We've got our cable with our 3 wires, and we've got it all stripped and ready to go. So let's get our clampy thing over here situated. And our end piece, oh, I see what's up. So I've reused this before. I can see there's already solder in the pieces. So I made this once and I took it apart, and now we're making it again. But some of these pins are a little bit twisted. I don't know. Whatever. If you look really close on these, I don't think the camera will focus on it, but each of these pins on the back side is labeled. So this is pin 1, and this is pin 3 in the middle, and this is pin 2. So it goes 1, 2, 3. So this clamp is just going to hold the connector for me, so I don't have to touch it, which is helpful. And then I'm going to use my little helping hands here to hold the wire for me, so I don't have to touch it. And the first thing I'm going to do with the soldering iron is just apply a little bit of solder to each of these exposed bits, and also to all the places where I'm going to put the wires. So I'm just going to put a little solder on the places where I'm going to connect things, and then I'm going to use the heat to connect them. So let's take our soldering iron. It's pretty hot now. Let's grab our solder over here just so it's in reach. Well, let's keep it in our hand because we're going to use it. And let's just heat up this wire a bit. And now let's melt some of this solder. Tin. This is the same, this process is the same no matter what you're soldering. You could be fixing like a lampshade, or you could be doing a car stereo, or whatever it is, solder, right? We just happen to be making audio cables right now. And then I'm going to apply a little bit of solder to the pins too. They always say when you're soldering you want to heat the work, not the iron. So I'm applying heat to the iron, and then I'm applying the solder to the spot where I'm putting the heat. I'm not actually using the iron itself, or I'm trying not to use the iron itself to melt the solder. I'm trying to get the piece hot enough that the solder melts on it, but not so hot that it melts all the plastic bits, right? Because if you just hold it here for too long, your connector is going to melt. So there we go. Now what we've got, they call this tinning the wires in soldering. So now we've got us 3 tinned wires. They're nice and ready to be connected. So we're going to take the first one, which is our shield. The shield goes to pin 1. So I'm just going to take it. First I'm going to take all 3 and make sure that I have enough cut, right, to reach them all comfortably. And I do, so this is going to be fine. So let's just connect pin 1 to pin 1 now. I want to make sure it's a good solid connection. Good. Now, it's important to keep in mind when you're soldering, when you once you've heated the work and the solder is kind of molten and you're holding it there, if it moves, if the cable moves while the solder is still hardening, it can cause what's called a cold solder joint, and you can tell because it looks weird. It doesn't look like the normal kind of shiny solder joint. It looks kind of cloudy, and those joints, they don't work well. So make sure when you're doing this, you have a steady hand, or as steady as you can, or you're using something like this to help you steady. Because shaking while the solder is cooling, will wreck your cable. So now we get to pick, because there's two cables here. It doesn't matter which one we use for which. So I'm just going to put the clear one to pin 2, which is this other one, and then I'll put the blue one to the bottom. Okay. These aren't the cleanest solder joints because I didn't clean out this tip and there was already solder in there, so I'm just going forward anyway, even though there might be some hate in the YouTube comments for my shitty soldering. That's fine. Let's see your audio jungle tutorial series, sir. Huh? Let's see that. And then you can complain about my solder joints. There we go. So, now we have all 3 sides connected on one end of the cable. Let me put this down. And I can let this go. Right? Boom. We want to make sure that there's no shorts here. Let's make sure that our cable is kind of protected. And if I had some, I would also use a little bit of shrink wrap. I don't know if you've ever used shrink wrap tubing, but you could put a piece of shrink wrap on here and then just use a lighter to make it all super tight. That's the way to go, but I don't have any shrink wrap right now. And then we screw it all together. So we take this piece. It only fits in one way. There's a little notch, so you gotta line up the notch. There it is. Okay. And then we start sliding all our pieces together. This also has a notch in it, so we make sure that it fits into the notch as well. This goes up into here, like that. Now it makes sense. Makes more sense with the other bit on it. Now we have our plastic piece, which is going to clamp down and protect those joints we just made. And now we just slide this up, and we squeeze here. It feels weird to pinch it that hard, but it's what it's made to do. And then we screw it. And there we go. We have one end of the mic cable done. And it looks just like any mic cable that you would see anywhere, because that's how mic cables are made. Right? So this is the male end of the mic cable. Now we'll move forward and do the female end. And we do that. We've got to grab the other end of the wire and cut off the black part with the tool. About a thumb-sized area. And be careful not to cut deep. Don't push hard because you don't want to cut that shielding off. We need the shielding to be the ground wire. My technique generally is to cut around where I want it to be, and then I cut a line down the center, and then I can kind of peel it off. And you'll tell if you cut too deep, when you peel this piece off, all this shielding will come off with it, and then you've just got to kind of cut that end off and try again. So now we're going to get rid of it, not get rid of it, we're going to unbraid this shielding, this copper shielding, and we'll twist it up. And before I go any farther, I'm going to take my own advice, and I'm going to put the pieces on before I get too far and realize I started it all together without putting it all together. So let's start there. I guess I could have used one of these that whole time, but whatever, it's fine, it's cool. I just wanted you to know they exist and why they exist. And then we decided that this goes into the this piece, stuck in there. Extra piece here. This is the female end. Same 3 pins. Alright, this goes on last. We need this thing with the top bit towards the upside. Alright. Now we need to cut off these little extra plastic pieces, which I really do think they're there just for the structural integrity of the cable. I like that. Less likely to get crushed. And I'll use my clippers, get it down as close as I can. Snip it off. Bam. Snip. Now I'm going to strip the hot and cold. And I'm keeping in my mind, when we made this, I put the ground, the shield, the ground to pin 1. We used the clear one on pin 2, and then we used the blue one on pin 3. So I remember that. So we're stripping these wires real quick. I'm being careful not to go too hard and strip too much of the wire, because then we have to start over, which is fine. You lose a little bit of the cable. It's no big deal. It's just kind of, well, we're doing it live on TV, so it would be embarrassing for one. Teeth is the best tool for this, but it can't be good for your teeth. They really do work great, though. Cool. So now we're stripped, and I'm going to tin this wire, and I'm going to tin the female end of the connector. So let's grab our helping hands guy, roach clip, sir. And I'll clamp this wire. Maybe I'll put this down so you can see a little better. And then we're just gonna tin the ends of the wires with the solder to make them. One benefit of it, I don't know if it's really the purpose, but one of the benefits is it keeps the wire together. It doesn't get all frizzy while you're working, which can be helpful and help prevent shorts, because you don't have a fringe bit of wire flying off the handle somewhere, touching another open, exposed wire somewhere, you know? So we're tinning this up, tinning this up. Tin, tin, tin. Groovy. Clean off my iron here with the Brillo pad situation. This one didn't really take well, so I'm just going to heat it up again, make sure that we're good here on the end, and we are. Cool. Let's put this down and get our other end ready. So I've got my little clampy thing here, which is super useful. I think it cost me $10. I've had it for years and years. I've fixed a lot of cables with it. So clamp this down. We're going to get our soldering iron, and I'm going to heat up the work. Not so much that it melts the plastic, but enough that I can melt this into it. That's another, just a terminology thing. In soldering and electronics, the thing that you're applying the heat to, they just call that the work. So we're applying the heat to the work. And now there's just a little bit of solder in each of these things. It's going to make it easier for me to make the connection. Let's do it. So we've already decided that the shield is going to go to pin 1. And they're labeled. This is pin 1. Let's make sure it's in there good. Pretty confident about that one. Seems solid. It's not. The solder joint's more solid than the pin is itself. Cool. And then we put the clear one to pin 2. Awkward position. This is how you burn yourself. Try not to move while it hardens. If you do move while it hardens, you can kind of see. You'll notice. You'll probably do. Ow! I touched it. It was hot. You probably do that a few times. Make cold solder joints. It's not the end of the world. You can always fix it. You can always come back and reheat these things and take them apart and reclaim their parts and change the cable. You can do whatever you want. It's not rocket science. But they use it on rockets. See, I want this to go, I'm not going to touch it, but I want it to go inside the hole, not on top of the hole. So I'm trying to bend it into place. Just having a hard time situating it there. There we go. All right, I want this to push in when the solder melts. Don't touch it. It's hot. Super hot. Here we go. Perfect. Okay. So now we made our connections. This is a little weird, like I gotta bend some stuff here to get it to fit in the cable, but that's alright, it's okay. I cut this a little bit too long. It's fine though. It's just not the perfect job, you know? I'm always striving for the perfect job. This is still fine. I still would trust this with my audio. And then we just need to line up the little notch. There we go. And on this thing, we have a little notch that goes in there. Kind of just jamming around. And then we got our clampy thing. Clamp it down. Boom. And screw it together. Alright. So now we made this cable, let's test it. Let's make sure that it works. We have a cable tester right here. So let's turn on the tester. And then we'll plug it in. Ooh. Nice, satisfying, clicky connection from a brand new cable. All the intermittent things always come on when you make that initial connection, so you hit the reset button the first time. If they don't come back, that's cool. So we can see that our cable's connected correctly. It's going the right direction. Pin 1 is going to pin 1, the sleeve. Pin 2 is going to pin 2. And pin 3 is going to pin 3. It works the same way with guitar cables, balanced or unbalanced. They're the same, similar connectors. You can get all sorts of different types, materials of connectors. I had a connector for the open mic, a guitar connector that has a silence function in it. So it had like a little circuit in it. When you pull the jack out of the guitar, it would silence itself, and that was pretty cool because it would prevent, you know, new people that don't know that you got to wait for the channel to be muted. They'll just pull their guitar plug and it'll make a huge pop, and everybody's like, ah. So that thing prevented it just by changing the end cable, one of them. So you can look on any electronics store and see the different types of cables and kinds and stuff. But now you know how to make it. We did that in what? I don't have a clock here, but it felt like maybe 30 minutes-ish, if that. And that was me going slow and getting confused about the thing. Now the second one would go much faster, and the third one would go even faster than that, and each one in succession is going to get better and better. Groovy. Now, I think this is a good spot to take a break. So I'm going to pop back over to the computer. I'm going to hit break time, and then when we come back, I'm going to plug this cable in. We'll use it, and we'll move a signal around my computer and outside my computer and all through all the gear in my rack, and we'll talk about audio interfaces and how to set up like a podcast or to record a bunch of tracks at once. All that stuff we're going to talk about today. So keep that in mind. And then next week, we're going to talk all about microphones and different kinds of microphones and how they work and where to put them and who made them and some of their historical significance. We're just going to have a lot of conversation about microphones, and we'll do some tests and stuff. So next week's going to be fun. We're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to come back and jump back into computer world. Thank you for sticking in with me. All right. Welcome back. We got our brand new cable. And, focus on me. Here we go. We got our brand new cable, and now let's talk about how to use it to get a signal into a computer to do something with. So this is going to be useful for really anybody that's trying to record audio into a computer for music or for a podcast or for narration or to make new types of music. Whatever it is you're doing, this is a pretty typical way that people can do it fairly inexpensively and still get good results. So let's pop over to my desktop. And he's back. So this is a typical home studio. This is like the home studio of 18, 20-year-old Luke. If we pop back here when I still lived at my mom's house, this is kind of a similar setup, right, to what I was working with back then. So this might be what a lot of people start out with, or you can go a long way with this, a real long way with this. But there are some limitations. So this is all stuff that you could go and buy at Guitar Center today, or Best Buy probably. It's pretty ubiquitous. There's 3 or 4 manufacturers that make these audio interfaces. That's what this is, this audio box thing. They're different colors. Focusrite makes one that's red. Presonus makes one that's blue. Behringer makes one that's some other color. There's a few of them, but they're all basically the same thing, with the same features and different boxes. Let's talk about what this thing is. So you can see this is the front of it, the blue part, and this is the back of it. And it costs about $100 or so, $50 on sale or something like that. You can pick them up used, maybe even cheaper. The front of it this is for a mic cable or a guitar cable. So this is like a dual jack. It's a Nutric jack. And you can plug either an XLR cable like this or a guitar cable like this into either one of these. And there's 2 of them here. And you can use them either one at a time, both at the same time, or you could split it so that these were like stereo. So you were recording 2 different things on 2 different speakers. There's some controls here to manage. This is 48-volt phantom power, and we're going to talk about how this works next week with microphones. This is important for certain types of microphones. For now, we can just ignore that, but it's important that it's there. There's some controls to adjust these 2, 1 and 2, the level on these 2 things. And you can see that it's split into 2 different, sets. One of them's for an instrument. So if we plug a guitar into here, it actually comes through the cable at a louder level than a microphone would. So it's treated differently when you've got the volume control. So it knows these are actually 2 separate things, the TRS jack and the XLR. Even though they're combined into one and you can use either one, they're treated differently in the circuitry of the machine. And this reflects that in its labeling. So if you got an instrument plugged into that, you're going along this scale. And if you've got a mic, you're going along this scale. Next we have a little mixer. So this gives you the ability to mix the level of these relative to whatever else you're playing through this machine, which is probably your computer audio. So if you were like playing guitar and you wanted you to be louder than the music that you were playing with, you could use a knob like this to adjust that balance. Then there's a headphone level. That's kind of obvious. You plug your headphones into this. This controls how loud they are. And then a main output level. So if you have your speakers plugged into this, this controls how loud they are. Then on the back, you have some outputs. These go out to your speakers, your headphones. Then we have MIDI in and out. This is for connecting like a keyboard to. And we have USB. So let's draw kind of a signal path through this real quick. Let's see. Let's pop over into Affinity Designer. And we'll grab this guy here. Let's make this bigger. All right, so let's grab a brush. Let's make it an arrow. And let's make it red. So we start here at the microphone. Somebody's singing into it, right? So this signal is going to go through the cable. We'll start at the cable. We'll say this is one end of this is plugged into the microphone, like so. Well, actually, I'll go the other way because of the arrow. The microphone is plugged into this cable. This cable continues, and it's plugged into this. Then it travels through USB. In this case, it's not always USB, but commonly is. It's going to travel through USB to your computer, and then the sound from your computer is going to travel through USB back to this. And then the output of all of that mixed together, which you can control with this little mixer knob, goes out these main outs to your left and to your right speaker, like so. And then you might have your guitar also plugged into this other jack here, right? And you've got your headphones here coming out this way. And then you've got your keyboard coming in here. Right, so all of the audio is being offloaded from your computer. Your computer's not doing anything audio related anymore. It's just feeding it over the USB cable to this thing, and this is offloading all the work, which is super cool for audio because your computer's busy all the time. It's doing all sorts of stuff. It's checking stock updates. It's updating the clock. It's checking to see if you've got mail. It's doing all sorts of stuff, tons of it. So it's busy. And when you're trying to record audio in real time, you don't want any interruptions, right? In your computer, you could record directly in your computer. Your computer has an audio interface built into it, but it's not anywhere near as purpose-built for the types of things that we're doing as something like this is. All right, so all of the audio is being offloaded from the computer, so you don't have to be subject to the computer's decisions about what to do with its processing time as it relates to your audio, and all of your stuff plugs into this, which is cool because now you don't have to climb behind the computer. Right? So this is a pretty common setup for a home studio, and this would be good if you were recording a podcast that had one or two people. If you were doing more than that, though, this wouldn't get the job done without some more gear. You'd need to have another mixer or something, or you would need to record all of your voices for the podcast with one microphone or with two microphones. So that would be one way to do it. But really, if you're going to do a podcast that has 4 or 5 people, you're going to want 4 or 5 inputs. So that just makes sense, right? Okay. So this is the PreSonus audio box. Focusrite makes one that I see a lot of people use that's red, that's pretty much this exact same thing. So if you need something like this and you're only doing 1 or 2 tracks and layering them, you can get away with this for a long time. If you're like me, though, this quickly became very, very limiting because I want to record way more than 2 things at the same time. Even if I'm just recording 1 acoustic guitar, there's a lot of times that I might have 2 or 3 microphones on it. And we're going to go over some of those scenarios weeks down the line when we get through all how the basic stuff works. Then we'll start talking about some techniques and ways to record. But this can become limiting. So if you're thinking about doing a big podcast or recording a band or a drum kit or just recording anything seriously, like not seriously like for money, but seriously like you're really going to invest into doing audio because you love it and it's your hobby, probably don't even bother with this. You're gonna outgrow this very, very quickly. But if you're just doing a podcast by yourself or something like that, and you're just playing around, something like this could get the job done. Let's move on to the next step, and we'll talk about some of the gear that I have in my rack. I'm not suggesting, well, I'll tell you what I like and what I don't like, but I haven't tried all the different manufacturers and everybody's different stuff. I tried a lot of stuff, and I'll tell you what I liked and I didn't like. And this is what I'm currently using and I currently trust today. So, we're going to use this as an example of signal flow as well. So here's a little example of what I've got next to me here in my rack. It looks a lot scarier than it really is. So the first piece of gear that I have at the very top of the rack is it's a bunch of XLR adapters. It's just male on the front and female on the back. And this has no circuitry in it at all. It doesn't do anything to the audio signal. The only reason I have this is that it allows me to plug stuff into the back without crawling back there, which is key. If I had to crawl back there every time I needed to change a mic cord, I wouldn't ever change mic cords, and then I wouldn't be creative because it'd be a pain in the ass, right? So this is a convenience thing. Cool. Underneath that, I have, this is called a patch bay, and it's similar to like an old school phone patch bay or an Ethernet patch bay. If you're a computer guy and have ever seen a network closet, you'll see stuff like this all over the place. This is an audio patch bay. And each of these, you'll see in the middle of every one of these things, there's a little switch. Every one of these is its own kind of unit track device, if you will. I have it set in 3 sections. So right now, the leftmost section, these are all my inputs. Anything that I plug into the left side of my patch bay. These over here are all my outputs. So anything that I take from my computer and I send out to something else, I send through these ports. And then the ones in the middle, I use these ones for gear, outbound gear. And we'll explain a lot of that more. But what I'm trying to, I guess, display here is that this is logically separated in my mind. It's not just a mass of plugs and holes. It looks cool, but this means something. They all have a purpose, and you can look at this as if they're just one at any given time, right? Because it's just a strip of the same thing, like all mixers are. It's one strip, and then it's duplicated across many, many devices or tracks. They all work the same way. Now, I have the patch bay in the mix for a similar reason. This helps me to connect all sorts of different gear in and out of the computer and out of my amps here and my profiling thing and the keyboards and all sorts of stuff. So I'm moving audio around all the time with this, and I don't want to ever really have to crawl behind my desk because it's dangerous to crawl behind my desk. I got 50-pound speakers here on little speaker stands, and I'm crawling underneath them where I can't see and bumping into stuff, and I just don't. That's not how I want to go out, right? I don't want to go out because I was trying to change a mic cable in the back of my rack, and I didn't have a patch bay. That's what this is for. I'm going to go through this in way more detail in the next slide, but this is just an overview. Underneath that, this is my audio interface. So if we look at the last slide, we had the this little PreSonus audio interface. Mine's old too. It's a RME UFX. And you can see there's 4 inputs right on the front of it. And these are usable inputs. I could just plug stuff into them. But I also have all these inputs on the back. Right? So I have wires going from all this stuff into my inputs in this stuff. And then I also have some extra ones on the front, which is super helpful. And all of the audio stuff, all my ins and outs, you'll see there's some more different types of connectors. It's the same as this, basically. There's some more different types of cables for working with other different types of gear that you're probably not going to find at Best Buy in mine. Like these word clock and MADI ins and outs and the optical stuff. So we did look at the optical cable at the very beginning, but you can see how Thunderbolt, optical, I've got MIDI, I've got any kind of in and out I want for working with audio available to me here. And then on the front, I have just some more inputs and some headphone outputs and a little USB thing. So if I wanted to record mobile, like if I wanted to take this to a concert hall or something, I could plug in a USB drive and I wouldn't need a computer. I could just record straight from these into this onto the USB key and then deal with the tracks when I got home. Whatever. Then you're going to have some speakers. Let's talk about the speakers for 1 second. So in audio, the speakers that we use are super important. Mostly in consumer electronics, the speakers that you're going to get they're altered in some way. They're all trying to find an edge, a way to make their speaker sound better than the other manufacturer's speaker. And that's all good. It's good for the consumer. It makes the end product music usually sound pretty good. With inexpensive gear because they use audio trickery and they manipulate the phase relationships between the sound waves and stuff like that. They do all sorts of clever, smart, and sometimes good things. But when we're working with audio, we don't want any of that. We don't want any trickery. We just want to hear exactly what it sounds like because we're trying to work with the pristine copy. Right, we're trying to get the audio as cleanly as possible, and then we alter it later so we have control. So when we're using speakers to listen to music for making audio or working with audio and film or something like that. These are called monitors. They're made to be flat speakers. They're not made to sound good. Like if you buy Beats by Dre or something like that, those have some kind of artificial bass boost in them to make hip-hop music sound good, and they do. It does what it's supposed to do. But you don't want that when you're trying to mix and record. You want to hear the truth. So these are special speakers called monitors, and you see them in documentaries and stuff. A lot of times, the more inexpensive ones are super flashy, like the speakers themselves. The woofers will be yellow or some kind of flashy color, so they stand out really quickly as not regular desktop speakers. They're studio monitors, and they're built accordingly, and they're priced accordingly. So you want to have the best monitors you can have, obviously, so you can hear the truest sound that you're recording. But keep in mind, monitors can get expensive fast, and if you're not making money with this, this might not be. It can get expensive, is all I'm saying. Also, you probably have headphones. I have headphones, but I don't use them to make my decisions with. Mostly, I use them to record with, because I don't want to have my speakers on when I'm playing the guitar or the track back. I need to be able to hear the music from the computer while I'm playing the guitar, but I want the mic to not hear that. So that's what I use these for. I don't use them for my mixing decisions mostly. If you're in a small room, though, like I used to be, using these is probably a good way to go. That's all I'll say about that. And then you probably got some sort of a MIDI controller or a keyboard or something like that, and that plugs into these MIDI ports. So that's an overview of what these main devices in my rack here are. And let's go a little bit further with it. Here's the second portion of my routing. So here's all the same stuff that's in my rack, but with all the actual gear. So at the very, very top of my rack, this is a power. It's called a power conditioner. It's not really much of a power conditioner. It's just a rack mountable power strip. So all this stuff plugs into this one thing at the top. And this isn't the exact model I have. The one I have is kind of cool. It's got little lights that pull out of it too. So if you were a live sound person in the back of a music venue and you needed to see everything underneath all these ports and stuff, it has little lights that pull out so you can see where you're plugging stuff into. It's pretty dope. So I got my power strip up there, and then I have my little connector thing. This is just the front and the back. And then the patch bay, which I put reversed. This is the back, and this is the front. And then my audio interface here. And then I have some what we call outbound gear. So this is audio gear, but I'm using electronics, like actual circuitry, to affect the sound and not the computer. There's a few reasons for that. One of them, it just sounds different. It's got that sound everybody likes, that analog, old school kind of character that sometimes digital stuff doesn't have. So I've got, for those reasons, and also because I need what's called a preamp for my microphones, and we'll talk about preamps a lot. Excuse me. Now, what's all this crap in the desk? Over here, I have a preamp. All this thing does is take the signal from my microphone here, which, if you remember, doesn't have any assistance, doesn't really have any electronic assistance. This has taken our mechanical sound wave. It's a transducer. It's changing the mechanical wave into voltage, and that voltage is traveling through the cable, which is coming up through here, and then this is taking it into the patch bay, and within the patch bay, sending it over to one of these things. And this is taking that signal and just turning it up. It's a pre-amplifier, so it amplifies the signal before it gets to where it's going. You don't necessarily need a preamplifier with a guitar, because a guitar signal is really loud. Just it's magnetic. It's a electromagnetic signal. It's not the voltage like this. Well, it does get turned into voltage, but the point is the amplitude's different. A mic line is way quieter than a guitar line or a unbalanced line, right? So it needs something to turn it up, to boost its signal at the other end. And that's where quality starts to matter more. As we spoke about before, I'm just going to talk about preamps for a little while because they're really important to all this gear. As we started to talk about before, this is a super, super famous and useful microphone, the SM58. It's like $100. Everybody has one, or 7, and they're just everywhere, right? For good reason. They're great microphones. But they're quiet. They're super quiet. And they need to be turned up by something. And that's usually where people start introducing noise, because you start turning these things up a lot. You don't realize how much you have to turn this up because that signal is so quiet. So you end up turning it up a lot, and a byproduct of turning it up so much is you introduce a lot of noise, and it starts to sound like a hack kind of performance. It sounds like cheap. It sounds cheap and noisy. So a lot of these electronics that we buy can take this signal and record it, but the preamplifier, the circuitry that turns that signal up, is really, really cheap, and it's loud itself a lot of times. Now, when we start talking about audio, like specific stuff, like these interfaces, they're pretty quiet, but they're still cheap. They're super cheap, right? So I don't want to put my clients' signal through something cheap. I want to put it through something that sounds good and doesn't introduce noise. Or I want the noise that is introduced through the gear that I use to be beneficial to the sound. And that's why I have a couple different types of these preamplifiers. There's the 4 that come here that are built into my interface, and they're all right. I use these if I'm doing a podcast. If I'm just trying to capture people's voices, fine, right? I just use these and I turn it up loud. And if there's a little noise introduced, whatever, no big deal. But if I'm recording an album, a record, or a song, and I'm layering track over track, and I'm going to eventually have 30 different tracks of 30 different instruments, all that noise adds up fast. You don't hear it in one track. You don't hear it maybe even in 4 tracks. But when you have 16 tracks, all that noise, it amplifies. And then you start processing it, and that turns up the noise more. So having a good, trustworthy, solid preamplifier is where it's at for getting good quality sounding audio. And a lot of the times, the preamplifiers that are built into the cheap mixers and stuff that you find at clubs, or the little Behringer knockoff ones, they're not good sounding. They sound harsh. They sound shrill. They sound brittle. Generally, I can't make that call about every model, but the ones that I've heard that are, under $400 or $500, they sound cheap. Maybe that's okay. You have to think about what your application is. If you're using this to make money, you can't have something sound cheap. If you're using this for fun and your own exploration, stuff can sound not its best. That's fine. You can also compensate for this after the fact in post-production. So we're talking about the routing here and my preamps. So I have this preamp here. The mic is going to go. Let's draw the signal of this mic. Let's grab my brush. We're red still. So the mic, this is exactly how it works in my studio. This is my exact gear and how it's plugged in. So the mic comes out through the cable, and I plug it right into there. Okay. All that does is, this is just an adapter, and on the other end of this adapter, there's another mic cable that comes off it. So this just gives me a way to inject a sound into these mic cables that I placed. So this one comes out, and it goes into the input of my patch bay, which is actually, on a patch bay, the inputs are on the bottom and the outputs are on the top. I don't know why. It goes into the input of my patch bay, and then the output of my patch bay comes over here, and it comes into the input of my audio interface. Right? That's how it would work generally. And then inside my audio interface, we have mic preamplifiers that are built into the machine. They're decent. They're all right. They're not fantastic, and that's okay. They're not supposed to be, because most people would use this in the way that I'm using it. You use these ones for convenience in the front. That's why they're there. They're super fast to plug into. They work great. But most people are using this input and output, and they're using this as a hub for other outbound gear. That's what I'm doing most of the time. So the way the patch bay works is, by default, if I don't have anything plugged into this connects right to that. So it's just like these were always connected and nothing is happening. But I can inject things into this signal, or I can hijack this signal now, because let's take a look at how the audio is going. Let's get rid of our last line that was going right to the output, because actually that was inaccurate. What's happening is the output of this is going to the input. And by default, these things are just together, right? They're just matched up. This one connects to this one, unless I interrupt that connection. So let's say I don't want to use the preamp that's built into this thing. I want to use one of these more purpose-built character preamps, one of these pieces of outbound gear. Now I would grab a cable, just a little patch cable, and I would say, all right, I want to take, well, let's take the input of this, and I want it to go instead over here to the input of my preamplifier, right? And let's say this guy comes right over here, and I go to the input of this. What, right? I'm using this preamp just because it's an easy explanation right now. This isn't actually the preamp that I use for my mic generally. It's not the one I'm using right now. Right, and then this is going to come back, and I have that going into this guy. Whoop. Get it? Get it? So I'm interrupting this signal. I'm saying, nah, instead I want to take this sound, I want to send it over here to this thing, and then I take the output of this, and I connect it back over to here. These are kind of confusing lines. We might have to go over this a couple times. I hope you're understanding what we're talking about here. Okay, we're back, and now the mystery is solved. All right, so now I'm going to tell you the truth. I was lying to you before a little bit. Here's what we've got going on. So let's swap back over to my desktop so you can see the picture. Let's get rid of our arrows. So let's get rid of that arrow too. Go away. All right. I have this thing. Oh, we got to go back to where I have my other patch bay thing. So we got to go back a fair bit. There. All right. Because this is where I fouled it up for you. This thing is just the adapter, right? But I don't have this going into anything over here. I have this going into the input of this. And then I have the output of this coming to the input up top here. And then I have the output of that going to the input of here. Right, so by default, if I don't plug anything into this at all, and I plug my microphone up into this guy, I'm going to go through this Great River, right? If I don't patch anything in, this is by default. I even have it labeled Great River up here. And this thing sits right here. Boop, 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 in that. Right? So that's not how I'm set up right now. Now I'm patched in. So we're actually taking this signal, and we're going to take this signal, whoop, and I have it going into a compressor. And the input of that compressor is jacked into here. Right? Remember, these are the same. So right now I'm going through this. And the output of this compressor, let's change the colors to make it more visible. Let's make a blue. Right, the output of this compressor, I'm going to the input of the compressor, which is here. Here's my inputs at the top. To the input of the compressor, right? And then the output of the compressor, whoop, comes into here. And let's change the color of the arrows that I'm using for the patch cables, because that'll make it easier to visualize too. So let's make those ones pink, because it's easy to see. So I'm taking this signal, which would normally just be going through that, right? I'm taking this signal, ooh, draw. And I'm saying I want this to go into here, my compressor. Right, so that takes the signal and it sends it over here to the compressor. And the compressor compresses it, it does a thing, and it sends it that processed sound back. And the processed sound back comes to this top. So I will take another cable and grab the process sound return and patch that back into here, which if you follow it will go into input 1. So now I'm using this piece of gear, right? My signal's going right into that gear, the outbound gear. This is coming out, and we're putting it in the patch bay. Cool. Now from the patch bay, we're putting in a cable, and we're taking that signal, and we're routing it over here, and then we have a cable. Well, it's a cable. It's running behind the desk, but there's a cable taking the sound into this thing, and then there's a cable taking the sound out of this thing, and then we're taking another cable, and we're putting a cable in here, and we're saying we want to take that sound now and put it back into this thing, right? So I hope that makes sense. That's the loop. The sound goes into this goes into this comes over here and goes into this, then this goes out to this. And I can change this on the fly by just moving those cables around. If I want to go into this compressor instead, I just have to move these two pink cables. Well, actually only one of them. I got to move them both. I got to move this to here. Let's delete those cables. So now if instead I want to send it to this compressor, let's use compressor as an example. Let's get rid of the blue lines. Now we say, instead of using this 2B compressor, I want to use this other, more aggressive compressor. So I might take this signal. Oh, I lost my, God damn it. There it is. Change our color back to blue. Make it a lighter blue, I guess, so it's easier to see. Right, so now I want to use this compressor instead. I would take a cable, I would interrupt my Great River signal and say, hey, you, I want you to go into the input of that other thing, which is patched in here, right? And then that goes out to this. And then this comes back around to the top there, right? And now I take another cable and I take the output. Let's grab our pink cables. I guess I was using blue. We can stick with blue. And I take our output and I would put that over here. So hopefully that makes sense for the routing of the cables and how this all goes together. Let's take another break real quick. And when we come back, we'll talk about more stuff. Let me know in the comments if this makes sense, if this is valuable, particularly drawing the lines for the audio, because it seems like it might be a little bit more confusing than you might need it to be. All right. Okay, we're back. It's back time. Awesome. So I decided we were going through my routing here, and I figured that's probably not super useful to you. I mean, it might be if you're a musician like me. A lot of us have similar setups to that. But if you're not a musician, if you're doing podcasts and other types of stuff, you're probably not going to go that crazy with it. I wanted to show you some other types of audio interfaces, and then before we end, I want to show you a little bit about how it works on the computer end once the interface is actually connected to your computer. So here's a small audio interface. This is made by IK Multimedia, and it's really designed to be plugged into your phone or your iPad or something like that. And this offloads the audio operations into its brain, and you've got a control on here for just gain, and there's phantom power on it. There's a little switch on it for phantom power. We'll talk about that in the microphone episode. So this is an option for people that just need one channel. So this is one of those dual plugs. It'll take either a guitar or a microphone, and you can plug this into your phone and play with GarageBand or whatever Android's equivalent stuff is. You could also plug this into your computer and use it as an audio interface. You'll just get the one channel, and that might suit your needs. It's pretty cheap, and like $30-$40 probably. Here's another one that one of the BVAM AA members mentioned. This is pretty ubiquitous. A lot of people have seen this. They're big in like video and on sets and stuff. This is an audio interface itself. It's also self-contained, so I can use this. It could be used to do an interview with somebody. You could take this somewhere and just record the room at a concert. You could bootleg movies if you were so inclined. But this also has two channels on it with those double connectors. So I can record a guitar and a microphone into this thing, onto this thing, and it goes into an SD card. Or I could plug this into my computer, and it will become an audio interface. And then I can plug my microphone or guitar into this thing, and it will be recognized by my computer, and I could use it in my software, just like I do with the bigger one here. So these are other options, and there's a plethora of options for audio interfaces. So you've got your audio interfaces, you picked it out, and now it's all plugged in, you made your cables, everything's good. What happens next? Well, let's pop back over to my desktop and take a look at how my setup is. Yours will definitely be different, but I'm going to show you just kind of a quick overview of how the interface works at the computer level. So desktop time. Let's get the desktop with me on it. How's that sound? Here I am. Let's do it. All right, so I'm using a Mac. Some people may be using a PC here, or if you're using Android or iOS, whatever, it all kind of works the same way, but I'm going to use the Mac for demonstration. So you see if I go into my preferences here and into sound. Now on Windows, you'd go into settings and then I think devices and then sound, or system and then sound, or something like that. But it's sound. You'll find it. Go into sound. You can see all these different interfaces. These are all different interfaces that are connected to my computer. These are all things I could use to play or record sound. So this is my monitor just being plugged in. It itself has speakers in it and a microphone for doing video conferencing and stuff. So if I needed to, I could use that. Machine MK3, that's my pad over here, my beat production station machine. So I could use that as an audio interface and record. I could actually plug a microphone into it and record vocals through it if I were so inclined. I'm not going to do that. You've got your built-in speakers and your built-in microphone. That's an audio interface, but it's built into your laptop or your computer. There's one that's built into the motherboard of a PC, and it's Intel probably, or Realtek or something like that. That's an audio interface. It's just built into your computer instead of all this cleaner, more expensive circuitry. Then we have system audio. This is a virtual device that I made that we don't need to get into right now. And ultimately, my Fireface UFX. Now, the Fireface UFX is the primary audio interface that I use. So let's pop back to the picture just for a second. So you can be sure over here. And then let's pop over to, where is it? It's in Designer, I guess. Yeah. So this thing right here is the Fireface UFX, and this shows up in my computer as Fireface UFX. So that's one way that I can see it, but it comes with its own software, its own mixing software. So at this point, I don't really use the computer's tools to manage the sound, and I don't use the front of the interface to manage the sound. It comes with its own mixer software, and PreSonus's comes with its own, and so does Focusrite, and each audio interface maybe has an integration with different DAWs and stuff. We're going to talk about DAWs too coming up in one of these coming weeks. Maybe right after microphones would be a good place for it, probably. So we can see that I've selected for my sound output. It's all my default output for my computer goes to my audio interface. And if we click over here on the inputs, we can see right here, here's the input level of my microphone as I speak through it. And here is my audio interface. And I could change this if I wanted to speak through something else. I could use the microphone that's in this webcam up here that we're not using. This is the one that points down at my desk so you can see my pad and stuff. That has a microphone in it I could use. But I've got this crazy rig. I got all this set up. Why wouldn't I use that? Doesn't make sense, does it? So this is the where I'm setting the system audio to use my audio interface. It just pops up. There's a driver for it that you install and you buy the thing, and it will show up as a device in your device list. So if we're looking at Zoom or something, I'm going to see all these devices. Or if I'm looking at VLC or an audio player or Premiere or any of those types of apps, all of these are going to list in the preferences, and I can pick which one I want to work with. I want to show you the software, the mixing software that comes with the interface, because this is what I use most to control it. So in my case, this is made by a German company called RME, and their software is called Total Mix. And I went with this company for my audio interface because they have really legendary driver support for a long time. They don't abandon like Windows 7. I think people still have Windows XP and the drivers when things change or whatever. They don't change for Windows XP anymore, but it has longevity. They commit to supporting their drivers for a long time. So that's why I went with RME. They also have great preamps and stuff. It's a good interface. This, here, let's make it bigger so you can see it better. I can go up here and make this bigger. A little bigger anyway. What we have here, it's split into 3 sections. So the top section, these are all my inputs. You can see I have this one muted. This is the input that I'm speaking into right now. I have it muted because I don't want it to come through my speakers. I only want it to go through to you. So that way I don't get the sound of myself speaking back through the microphone. So this is muted right now. But if I had my headphones on, I would unmute this and then I could hear the sound of my own voice coming through the headphones. I'm not doing that. So these are my inputs, and you can see the signal coming through them. So you can see there's another microphone somewhere in the room. I don't even remember. Oh, yeah, the table microphone over there from when I was doing the soldering. You can see that's picking up a little bit of signal right now, and I didn't have that muted. I probably should have, but it was far enough away. It didn't cause a problem. So these are all the inputs for all the different things that I have on my interface. They correspond to the image over here in Designer of all these. And all these. So all of these things on the back and on the front and these digital things, all of these ins and outs, they're all represented here and named accordingly. So I've renamed some of them so they make sense to me. So you can see this first one, which we said by default went through my Great River preamp when we were going through all this thing here. I've named that one GR. This is Great River. I can turn it up and down from here. I can mute and unmute it. I can move it around, or I can route it to other places from here. And that's cool. So on my first input, I'm getting this. On my second input, I'm getting that table mic over there. And I didn't have to do anything so you could hear that, right? They're both coming through the audio interface. They're both being presented to the system. That's how this particular software is handling it. In Zoom or something like that, I don't know if Zoom would mix all these channels together. But luckily, the screencasting software is presenting them all to you, which is great. So cool. These are the inputs. Now, these are the software outputs. So inside my DAW, inside my music software on the computer, I can send sounds out to things. And that's what I can control here. So I'm not doing that right now. You're not seeing it. But we have some time. Maybe we'll do it real quick. And then down here, the bottom row, these are all my outputs. So these correspond to the outputs here. And the main output, the primary output, is my speakers. And that's over here. It's named main. So this controls the level of my speaker. See how low it is? I don't want to hear the sound. It's super loud. So I have it low, and I can control the sound of my phones, and I have full control over who hears what in this software. Now, this is before it gets recorded anywhere. I'm messing with the sound before it gets really presented to the computer, if that makes sense. It gets presented to the computer in various different ways depending on the software you're using. So let's open up my DAW. I use PreSonus Studio One, and we'll take a look at how this all maps out in Studio One and how it is useful to me. So let's just hide that a little bit. Let's open up Studio One. It's scanning all its stuff and plugins, and it's doing its thing. It's saying it can't find that thing I had plugged in because I unplugged it. Fine. Let's create a new song. Empty song's fine. Actually, let's talk about this a little bit. This confuses people. So I'm starting a new song, and I have some options here. Kind of like in Photoshop when you can set your resolution and stuff. Well, you have the same thing in audio. But in audio, the resolution is it's measured in what's called samples. And it's not like samples of sampled like R&B, old hip-hop, like Under Pressure, not a sample like that. But every time the audio interface takes a snapshot of the signal going through it, that is called a sample. And you can adjust how many times that happens per second. That gets changed in your sample rate that's here. Now, if we think about the way that a wave works and the frequencies that a human can hear, we can hear from about 20 hertz to some people say they can hear up to 20K. So that's the upper bounds of what we can hear. So in order to support having both sides of that whole waveform, we have to double that, because if you think about the wave, there's the wave and then there's the other side of the wave. So we have to at least double it to even have enough information to hold all the frequencies we can hear. So that's why you see these start at like 44.1. That's enough to hold up to 20K, right? And then 48. And they go up, and depending on what you're working on, you may need different sample rates. A CD-ROM, like not a CD-ROM, but a CD that you would play music on is fixed. It's always 44.1 at 16 bits. So if you're outputting to a CD, if that's your primary medium, then that would make sense to record at 44.1. That's one theory. Other people record at 48K, and then when they're done, when they do their export, they might cut it down. So that's handy, because a DVD, like a movie or something, those are usually at 48K as opposed to 44.1. So my thinking in the way that I do it is I record at 48 because maybe I want to use that in video or stuff, or maybe I want it to get picked up by somebody. I want it to be compliant with what they're doing, and it gives me the ability to just bounce it down to a lesser sample rate if I need to. Then we have our resolution. So this is how many bits are being collected. And that's kind of a techie thing. We don't have to talk too much about that. But what I want you to know is these are pretty much your options. You have 16 bits, which is kind of a little bit, it's similar to a photograph. You have the same kind of options in a photograph. You have an 8-bit photo. It's just there's less room for colors and stuff in an 8-bit photo. There's not enough digital room to have as many colors as if you have 16-bit. Now, audio is kind of similar, but it's not colors. It's like, I don't want to say it's frequencies either, but it's headroom. So you have some options here. At 16 bits, you don't have the ability to capture anything over that, right? And my computer has some balls, so I'm able to record at these higher resolutions, and that gives me one primary benefit, and that's the sound doesn't get clipped off at a certain amplitude, because that's the problem with digital sounds. When you hit these converters too loud, they don't have enough resolution to handle the amplitude after it gets to a certain point. So if you hit the cap, you get super bad, awful digital distortion, and it never sounds good. It's not a musical sound at all. It just sounds like cracking and popping, like it's not good. You don't want it, right? This And now in 2020, we don't have to worry about that so much because we have what's called 32-bit float, which gives us way more information, way more of a ceiling for that. So it's almost impossible to get to a point where the information can't be captured if your resolution is this high. But the trade-off is it's expensive on your computer. So you have to weigh that out with what kind of computer you have. That's what these mean. And that's how you set them up. So I'm going to set this for 48 and 32-bit float. Then I can set my time base, which I want to be bars, which are kind of the building blocks of music. And we'll talk more about bars and notes and things like that and tempo when we do MIDI. I can set my song length, the tempo, and the time signature and the key signature, blah, blah, blah. We'll just hit OK here. So now I've got my new song and groovy. Now I wanted to show you how all my audio interface stuff maps into Studio One. So let's add a track here. And we'll go over DAWs too and tracks and all that stuff later. So don't worry about that. This is just a vessel to get you to the preferences. So I'm going to go into my track settings here and just go to Audio I/O Setup in my DAW. It's different in every DAW, but this is what it looks like in Studio One. You can see which device we're using because I had multiple connected, and this is the one that we selected in the sound preferences, Fireface UFX. And across the top of this matrix, you can see all my inputs. These are all the physical inputs. They map to everything that was in this up top here, right? And I can assign them to whatever I want in my DAW. So right now, I've made these, they're not tracks, they're inputs. So I created these. I said the Great River is my analog 1, and the Pacifica is my analog 2, and the ISA is my analog 3. And then I have some other outbound gear here. This is my guitar effects unit. I have that on these 6, 7, and 8 for a few different reasons. And we're running out of time, but I'm going to try and show you them. And then I have input 1, 2, 3, and 4. These I have mapped to the inputs that are on the front of my audio interface. So if we look at my designer image here, let's go, where's designer? These 4. So now in my software knows about all these, and I've given them names, and I know how to address them. I don't want to close this. I just want to minimize it. So I have my audio routing set up, and you can see I have way more channels. I don't have to use them all. I'm only using the ones that I'm using. I have other options for digital inputs and all sorts of stuff. These are the ones I'm using, and that's how I have it set up here. So now when I go to mess with this track in my DAW, if I click on this, I can set which one I want to record from. And they're not all named correctly, so I can do this quickly, which is super important if you're trying to do creative stuff, especially for work, because time is money, and I don't want to have to figure all this out every time. I want to record the one that's plugged into the Great River, so it should be named Great River, so I can see that, and it should everything that I have is pretty much color coded, so I can see it. This will kill a project faster than anything. If I'm feeling creative and I want to go in and record something, or some friends come over and we're trying to record something, and if I don't understand this, or if it's not set up clearly and I'm trying to figure out inputs and stuff, it kills it. It kills the vibe of the room, and the project is pretty much dead. So I have to understand this. It has to be clear, and it has to be easy to use so it can get out of my way and I can do the creative stuff. So it's two separate things. I treat them as two separate activities. I'll have a day where I'm doing technical stuff and I'm setting up my routing and I'm optimizing my workflow, and I'm not trying to make music that day. I'm trying to remove impediments from making music so that I can make music faster when that creative inspiration strikes. Now I said we were going to do a little bit of there's a few things that I said we were going to do, and I'm not going to lie to you. So let's go get that cable we made and test it. Let's use it. This is what we made at the beginning. We're going to take our lowly SM58 and let's plug that in. And then this isn't a last. There we go. Now, I want to treat this microphone differently than the one I'm speaking in. So since we've decided I'm using the Great River, and I am, if I hit record here, you can see my speech. And if I actually record this, we'll record my voice. So let's do that. If I record my voice, you can see I'm speaking. That's pretty hot. I wouldn't record a vocal track this loud. I'd turn it down a bit. But for a broadcast, this is fine. So you can see I'm recording from the Great River, and you can see it's too loud because it's clipping up here. It's turning this red thing on saying, hey, buddy, turn it down. But I'm not gonna. You can't tell me what to do. Now, let's use one of our other inputs. So I've got many available. Let's take the second one. We'll use the Pacifica, the one that I said sounded expensive. So let's go over here. And let's make a new track here. I'm going to mute this one. That was just my voice. And let's assign this one to the Pacifica and hit the arm track thing. So you can see now there's a signal coming through the Pacifica when I speak through it. You should be able... let's move this out of the way. You should be able to hear this. I can see that you can hear this, so that's cool. So now we're speaking through the Pacifica. And if I use my controls over here, I can change the volume, and I can flip the phase. So now I'm flipping the phase button, so you should be able to hear what that sounds like. Shouldn't sound like much because there isn't really signals to conflict here. And then there's a pad, so I can turn the signal down a lot. If I was recording somebody that was like metal, that was screaming really loud, I could just turn them down a lot. So I have the controls over my volume here on Pacifica, track 2. I'm using my second preamp, and it's working fine. Cool, let's record something with it. I'll disarm this track, and we'll just make it smaller, get it out of the way. And we'll get rid of this little clipping thing because that was a while ago. And let's bring up our mixer here so we can see that as well. And let's go back here and record something. So this is our fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it, we like to record our podcast with a metronome on. I don't know where we picked up the metronome for our podcast, but we found that it's really helped us to keep the rhythm of our speech in motion. All right. So now we have our track. Let's listen back to it. I'll just solo it so we'll make sure we're only listening to this. So this is our fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it, we like to record our podcast with a metronome on. I don't know where we picked up the metronome for our podcast, but we found that it's really helped us to keep the rhythm of our speech in motion. Cool. So now we've used the cable that we've made, and we're speaking into the lowly SM58, and it's going through the Pacifica preamp and coming in through this Total Mix software where I'm kind of controlling it first, right? It's coming in through here, and then we're presenting this signal over to Studio One, and we're saying pick up the Pacifica, and we recorded it to the disc. So that's how we've got this from the air in my room to the, as Peter Mulvey would say, deep dark of a Japanese hard drive. That's how we made that happen. Now, to take it one step further, we have 10 minutes left. I want to take this signal now, and I want to send it out of the computer, and I want to send it through my guitar processor here, and let's put like a delay or a distortion or something on it, and then back to the computer, and let's mess with it for a bit and just record some different sounds on a different track so you can see how the routing and why it's cool to have all this madness going on, and what benefit I really get out of going through this. So let's do that. So here we go. We've got our sound right now. I don't want to talk too much about the routing in the computer because that's going to be very dependent on your DAW. But you can see it's going to the main output right now. And let's disarm it. We're not recording right now. I don't want it to go to the main output. I want it to go... I have it named to Kemper Reamp. So let's open up my preferences here just so you can see what that maps to. My I/O setup. We can see the one that I have... my output tab, I only made one output here, and it maps to my analog 8. So what this is gonna do when I hit play, it's gonna take this signal and it's not gonna come through my speakers anymore. It's gonna go out to analog 8, which is one of these things over here in Designer. We can count them. Analog 8 is this. So it's gonna physically send that signal out of this, and then that's going to go to the patch bay. right? And now I can say the output of analog 8, I have just a path to, so I can grab it. So analog 8 I have plugged in. Let's take it and plug it into my guitar effects processor. Let's grab a patch cable, if I have one. Oh, man. You know what? I'm going to have to unplug. Oh, you know what? I'm not even using this microphone. We don't need these right now. Cool. So I'm going to get rid of these patch cables. And the patch cables are super short, right? These are like 1 foot cables, maybe. So, because I'm just using them to patch from one input to another input. So we're taking the output from out 8, which I have labeled out 8, and let's put it through the guitar effects processor. So I'm going to take that, and I'm just going to plug it into the input of my guitar thing and see what happens. Kemper in. All right. Cool. So now when I play it, the signal should go into my guitar processor, and that's what we want. And I'm going to add another track here. And let's set this to one of the inputs of my guitar processor. And we'll turn it on mute so it doesn't play back, just to make sure it's working. I just want to make sure there's a signal coming through, because if there isn't, then I did something wrong. So let's just hit play. Let's hit record. All right, it's not working. So let me just make sure I got my amp thing set up correctly to do this. I got to set the outputs on that too, so that we're setting the input here to be the return input reamp. Boom. Now we have output 8. Let's take a look in Total Mix and make sure that we see the sound going to output 8. I'm going to set a loop here. I know we're running low on time. Let's see if we can get this done in 5 minutes. I think we can. So this is just going to play that track over and over and over again. Let's pop over here. We can see the sound is being presented to analog 8. And then, well, what I don't see is that sound coming back through the Kemper, which I would expect. So something's not right. Let's unplug this and see what's going on. Let's take... I'm pretty sure this should just work. My outputs are correct. Dun, dun, dun.
Where we picked up the metronome for our podcast. So this is our fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it, we like to record our podcast with a metronome on. I don't know where we picked up the metronome for our podcast. So this is our...
Okay, so check it out now. Now what's happening is we've patched this output to my guitar effects processor, and now we're recording the guitar effects processor back in. So as I make changes on my guitar thing, it's going to change the sound, and we're going to record that sound on a whole separate track. So it's like doing layers in Photoshop, and we're keeping our original layer here safe. We're not touching it. We're not messing with it in any way. We're just playing it, and it's going out through the outputs, and we're taking it back in after it gets processed. So let's hit record, and I'll just mess with some of the presets on the guitar processor, and you'll hear what I mean.
So this is our fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it, we like to record our podcast with a metronome on. I don't know where we picked up the metronome for our podcast. So this is our fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it, we like to record our podcast with a metronome.
I think you're not hearing it because I have it muted, so let me turn it on.
Metronome for our podcast. So this is our fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it, we like to record our podcast with a metronome on. I don't know where we picked up the metronome for our podcast. So this is our...
Okay, so let's listen back to just that. I'm going to turn it up so you can hear it, because it turned it down being processed.
Fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it, we like to record our podcast with a metronome on.
Yeah. So let's just do it. We'll run through a couple times. I'll change the preset while it plays. So I'll mute this one. And we'll solo this one. And I'll hit record.
So this is our podcast. You can hear in the back of it.
I didn't hit record, did I? I didn't see it recording. I need to arm this track so it does record. Here we go.
So this is our fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it. We like to record our podcast with a metronome on. I don't know where we picked up the metronome for our podcast. So this is...
All right. So you can hear what happened as I just kind of flicked through some of the presets. This is super handy because I can record the clean sound of my guitar, and then I can record a bunch of other instruments. And if those other instruments call for a different sound, I can just run it back through the machine and change the sound to whatever I want and re-record a new guitar track. It's also super handy if you're doing a thing with other musicians, like you're recording a band, because their time is super valuable too. And you don't want to have to call somebody back to the studio to re-record another guitar part. So having a clean signal stored somewhere so that I can mess with it later is very important to me. Let's listen to what this did.
So this is our fake podcast. You can hear in the back of it. We like to record our podcast with a metronome on. I don't know where we picked up the metronome for our podcast. So this is our...
And there you go. That's how it works. So let's swap back over to my other microphone. Old trusty. I'm going to unplug the other microphone. And there we go. And now we know all of our routing works. We know our cable works. And we know our guitar effects processor works. And we know that our recording software works because we just went through a test of all of that. And that's how it all kind of goes together. And now as we proceed through the audio stuff, it's going to get more fun because we're going to start working on music sounding stuff and less technical sounding stuff. It's still technical, but we're going to be working with real music, and that's more fun. So get yourself excited. We're going to talk about microphones. So I guess I prematurely got you excited. So we're going to talk about microphones, which is also really fun. And then we're going to start making sounds. Cool. Have yourselves a good week. Stick around to watch Laura do her thing. She's painting for 3 hours. She's going to go from 1 to 4. And she's dope. Check it out. It's awesome. And have yourselves a glorious week. Bye-bye.